So what is the best way to learn scales on the guitar? Well, to be honest with you, there are a ton of different methods that you can use, and I really can't tell you which one is best for you. That's ultimately for you to decide. But if you are, in fact, one of those many guitar players out there who are ready to start studying scales on the instrument, you're in the right place, because today I am going to cover two of my favorite ways to teach scales on the guitar. And more importantly, I'm going to show you what you need to know in order to choose the best method for yourself. And why do you want to know that? You know why. Because you're a guitar player, and this is GuitarAmado. Well, hello again, all my wonderful guitar playing friends out there. Welcome back to another exciting edition of GuitarAmado, where the goal is, as always, to show you how to think for yourself as a guitarist and a musician so that you can play it your way and become your own teacher. I'm your humble host, Adam Amado, and I've got new episodes coming at you every single Friday, so be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you like what you see. And now on with today's wonderful lesson, scales. And more specifically, deciding the best path to take when you're just getting started learning scales on the guitar. Because as we all know, there is no shortage of methods for learning scales on the guitar. So how do you know which one to pick? How do you know which one is going to be right for you? Well, it really comes down to deciding what your goals are as a guitarist and a musician. Not always the easiest thing to do when you're more towards the beginner end of the spectrum, but fear not, it is possible, and I'm going to walk you through a few steps right now. So first of all, we've got the tried and true box pattern method for learning scales. So for example, if we start here, the 5th fret of the 3rd string, that note is C. And what a box pattern does is it gives you a visual shape with which to organize your scales on the fretboard. So for instance, this shape is... So if you're watching my fingers, notice that none of my fingers leave this 4-fret grouping here. So 5, 6, 7, and 8 are the fret numbers. So the primary advantage here in learning box patterns is that you can start to think more in finger numbers rather than just memorizing the fret numbers. And when you start to think more in finger numbers, it really helps to organize that mental picture, that visual image on the guitar. So let's take a closer look at this box pattern with keeping finger numbers in mind. So remember, we've got 5, 6, 7, and 8. And all of my fingers are going to stay within those respective frets. So when you just think in terms of finger numbers, you know exactly which fret to go to on each string. So we've got 1 and 3. Next string, we have 1, 2, and 4. And the string after that, we have 1, 3, and 4. And then finally, another huge advantage for box patterns, especially for beginner guitar players, is that when you learn that shape one time, you can move it anywhere you want and get a different scale. So it all depends on what note you're starting on. So for example, we're in the C right here. If we move it up a whole step, now we're on the note D. A whole step is 2 frets, by the way. So it went from 5th fret to 7th fret. Now we're starting on the note D. So we play that exact same finger pattern. Now we just played a D major scale instead of a C major scale. So that is absolutely one of the biggest advantages of box patterns. And quite frankly, just about anything on the guitar, can be organized into a visual shape. So this next method for learning scales on the guitar is one of my personal favorites. But just to be fair, I'm a little biased on this because I am a big fan of learning music theory on the instrument. So if we're thinking of that same major scale that we just looked at, how I would begin teaching this next method would just be to lay it all out on one single string. So in this example, we're going to use the second string. So we're just taking the C note that we originally started at here on the third string, 5th fret, and I'm going to move it down to the 1st fret of the second string. Exact same note, right? Those are called unisons of each other because they're the exact same pitch. So that's going to be our starting note, but before we can actually play this scale, this is where we would have to get into a little bit of music theory. So just bear with me here a second. So the major scale is composed of 7 different notes, plus something we call an octave. So an octave is a special note. You know, that prefix oct, O-C-T, like an octagon has 8 sides. So that octave is the 8th note of the scale. But it's kind of a special note because it's where everything starts over again. So for example, this C note. And by the way, if you want to know a cool trick for locating octaves on a single string, you just add 12 to whatever fret that you're on. So we're on the 1st fret here with this C. 1 plus 12 is 13. And that's the octave. So this note at the 13th fret is also a C. So it's very similar to that unison that we looked at when we moved from the 3rd string 5th fret to the 2nd string 1st fret. Those are both C's as well, but the difference is these are the exact same C, whereas this C and this C are octaves of each other. So this C is clearly higher. You can hear that. It's a higher pitch than this C. All right, so we've got our starting point and our ending point defined. And that's what we call the octave, right? So starting point, 1st fret, ending point, 13th fret. So that octave being the 8th scale degree means that our starting point is the 1st scale degree. So then it's just a matter of going in between those and filling in the rest of the scale degrees. And for that, you just need a very simple formula. Just remember there are half steps between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. So the next thing that we would have to talk about then is, what is a half step? Well, a half step is very simple. It's just a measurement of distance on the fretboard, and that distance equals 1 fret. So thinking back to that formula, we have half steps between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. So if we know that 8 is right here at our 13th fret, that's the octave we defined, right? We know that 7 is a half step below that. So all we have to do is move down 1 fret to the 12th fret. That's scale degree 7. So keeping that thought in mind, that a half step is the distance of 1 fret, we also need to know the distance of a whole step. So very simple math here. If 2 halves make a whole step must be the distance of 2 frets. You got it. So now thinking back to our formula, we have half steps between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8, which means everything else is going to be the distance of a whole step. So now, armed with those key pieces of information, we can then think our way through this major scale on a single string without knowing what frets are going to be played. That'll look and sound like this. And now if we compare that with the box pattern scale that we learned first, we can see that they look totally different on the guitar fretboard, but our ears can't tell a difference at all. It's the exact same scale, 2 different ways to play it. And that is probably one of the most common reasons for so much confusion surrounding learning scales on the guitar, is because there's so many different ways to accomplish the exact same thing on the fretboard. You know, that was just one example of 2 different scales that accomplish the same result. So, you know, given enough time, I could probably come up with 100 more examples just like that to accomplish the exact same thing in two different ways. So the real question here is not, should I learn scales? I mean, of course you should learn scales. They're a very important part of music, no matter what instrument you play. But the real question here is, what is the best way for you to learn scales? For example, if you're one of the millions of guitar players out there who is just completely satisfied with this being a part-time hobby, and you can sit at home and just look up songs on the internet, you're going to be reading tabs and stuff like that, box patterns are probably the better choice for you because it requires slightly less thought. It's a little more beginner friendly. You can get up and running a lot quicker. But that being said, box patterns can also be extremely limiting if you have loftier goals for your ultimate vision for yourself as a guitar player. You know, let's say you want to join a band and write original music, or even a simpler goal. You just want to hang out with your friends or jam with some local musicians in your area. So in either of those situations, it's really going to be extremely beneficial to you to be able to think through at least the basic fundamentals of music theory. So that way, when the keyboard player calls out, hey, we're in the key of G and we're doing a 1-4-5 progression, then you'll know exactly what chords are being played and what scales go with those chords. So that's all for now. Be sure to leave me a comment. Let me know what kind of struggles and what kind of issues and questions do you have revolving around scales on the guitar. And as always, be sure to hit that like button if you found this video to be helpful. I will see you next Friday, and until then, happy practicing, my friends.